So I'm very grateful I did get here, despite having to fly through clouds of molten glass. And it's been a fantastic day to hear everyone speak, and I'm really, really happy to have been invited to speak. And I think there's quite a lot of symmetry. Stephen started by talking about how you shouldn't have gold before you have green, and I'm here to agree with him. But to tell you how gold can complement green open access. So just to recap a little bit, green is about open access repositories and gold is about open access publishing. So I want to talk about how these two approaches can and should work together in a sustainable way to help increased access to research, which I think is what everybody here thinks should happen in terms of, well, to increase access to research. Both are very important, and I wouldn't disagree at all with that point. Heather said in many ways open access is very similar to traditional journal publishing, and I'd like to sort of reinforce that Biomass Federal publishes 207 journals at the moment, and increasing very rapidly the number of journals. They run exactly like journals have always run the whole of my life that I've been in journal publishing, which is my whole career, except that they have a slightly different way of funding themselves, and they are all online, and they do a lot more things than journals used to do. All of our content is peer-reviewed, but the difference is all content's made freely available on publication. The authors retain copyright under a Creative Commons license, and the cost of publishing is often, but not always, with an open access journal, covered by an article processing charge, which is usually paid by research funders or institutional funds. I think author pays is a little bit of a misnomer in that it's very rare that the author pays the charge. I don't think open access publishing would have survived the 10 years it survived if it was coming out of the author pocket. It comes from institutional funds, it comes from research grants, mainly from research grants, it comes from societies, it comes from all sorts of places, very rarely out of the researcher's own pocket. And it's been described in a similar way to broadcast television or radio stations. Peter Suber describes it as those with an interest in disseminating the content pay the production costs up front so that access can be free of charge for everyone with the right equipment. And I think those with the interest of disseminating the content are the people who are paying for the research. The research article is the result of a piece of research. We pay for the research through research grants, through research bodies, and that product of the research needs to be disseminated very widely. And it makes sense for that to come out of the same budget as the research itself. It is true that actually half of open access journals do not charge the author or the author's institution an article processing charge, that they somehow cover those costs through sponsorship at the beginning of the process themselves. And we're finding as an open access publisher that more and more organizations, especially learned societies, but also other institutions, are coming to us and saying, we want to publish a journal, we will pay the cost of producing each article, which is what we charge, but we're not going to ask for it from the author or the author's institution. The other thing that I need to mention is, of course, that most open access publishers, if they do charge APCs, will waive a publication cost if the author or the author's institution can't pay, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a minute. So where is open access in 2010? There were last week 5,013 fully open access journals in the DOAJ. It's interesting, statistics today seem to vary, so that I have some figures which somewhat disagree with some of Karen's figures that she just mentioned. Outsell, who's a research organisation who do research on behalf of the publishing industry generally, did a report on open access in 2009, and they estimated, based on April 2009, on the DOAJ in April 2009, which had 3,800 journals in it, that 9.6% of all peer-reviewed journals were open access, and they reckoned that that was about 6% of all articles published at the time. Since then, the number of journals in the DOAJ has gone up to about 5,013, and so that percentage has increased. It is still a very, very small percentage of the output of journal publishing as a whole, but as a percentage, I believe it is increasing. We're seeing, well, I'll show you a slide of how our submissions are increasing. And a significant percentage of open access journals are now indexed by Thomson. We did a look at the medical side of things, and 32% of medical open access articles are indexed by ISI. So, you know, that's not very many, but considering that open access journals generally are significantly less than 10 years old, and it takes 4 years for Thomson to decide to actually put something in their indexes, it's not a bad number. Again, a researcher writing a PhD at the University of Turin, Elena Giglia, compared the DOAJ with the JCR in 2008 and found that about 10% of the journals listed in 2008 got 2008 impact factors. So more and more journals are being indexed by what we all agree is not a particularly good measure of anything, but it's what the academy chooses to base its decision on where to publish on. So impact factors are a very important thing if we're talking about how people choose to publish. So why gold and green? Well, institutional repositories allow early open access to work which has been accepted for publication and can provide access to lots and lots of other research, as we've heard today. But open access publishing can provide instant access to the final published version, and we've heard quite a lot about the issues of various different versions. If you have lots of different versions of an article, it makes it very difficult to know where to link to. And what you can do by posting the final published version is you can do reference linking, you can do, it has a DOI, it has all sorts of things that you can't do in the institutional repository, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Karen just described in great detail what publishers do, and we see our role as providing a service to the scientific community to help to maximize the dissemination of research results and information. And as technology has changed, this role has changed. We manage the processes around not only peer review, but about dissemination and preservation. But we also, and you know, I echo Karen here, develop innovative content, innovative tools. Research is much more than just paper, text on paper these days. There's linking to all of this data. We have videos, we have websites, we have a very large amount of content which actually doesn't work in a sort of paper journal the way it looked 20 years ago. So we're developing all of those things and making all of those things possible, as well as just managing the peer review, which is a very large part of what we do at the moment, but only a part of it. And I think the question I would pose to Stephen is what is a journal and what does it do? Because the whole process that he showed us was about an author putting a paper to a journal, the paper going through peer review, it then getting accepted, it then being put in an institutional repository. Well, if you have no journals, if you just have the institutional repository, what happens to that process? And where is that decision about where the thing is published and the quality that the journal brings it, and all of those things that a journal brings to a paper? And I think that question is quite an important one. I think the other thing that I think is, if you go back to when journals started and when publishers started, I think publishers started as a sort of outsourcing by learned societies of the role of looking after their publications. And I think to a certain extent we are still an outsourcing of what the scientific community is doing. You guys are about making the research happen, and we concentrate on the processes around it. And I think it's, yes, all the universities could become mini publishers in themselves, but is that what you're there for? Or is it easier to outsource that to a group of people who can do it efficiently for you? So I think those are some questions that I think need to be thought about. The other number that I disagree somewhat with Karen about is there's a survey going on at the moment by a European community-funded project called SOAP, which is the study of open access publishing. The survey on Sunday morning had 32,000 responses from researchers, and one of the questions it asked was, how easy is it to get access to research in your field? Less than 50% said very or high or quite easily. 40% said they had difficulty, and 10% said they could not get access. So that is a different number, and it's one that isn't finished yet. The analysis hasn't been done, so I'm not, I just tell you that's a number that I can see, which is staying very constant as the number of surveys responses go up. And the survey is, the project is being put together by CERN, the European Commission, Sage Publishers, Springer, and Biomed Central. So I briefly touched on the benefits of open access publishing. You have a version of record which is freely available the moment it's accepted for publication virtually. It includes the DOI reference linking, supplementary material, links to data, lots of other innovations. It's deposited in many repositories immediately, PubMed Central, and automatically, that there is no click from the researcher, that the open access publisher will deposit it automatically in whatever repository is important to do. But there's also the increased visibility of the research. And the other thing that lots of surveys of authors say, they don't care whether the journal is open access or not. What they care about is the prestige of, or the perceived quality of the journal that they're submitting to, the relevance of the journal to the community, the likelihood that they're going to get their paper accepted. So this is how they choose their journals, whether they had a positive experience in the past, and how fast that paper is going to be published. These rankings come from, again, from the SOAP survey, but they also come, we survey all of our authors twice during their submission and their publication experience, once on submission and once on publication. And one of the questions we ask them is, why do they choose to publish with us? And this mirrors the responses that we get from those. And more are choosing to publish in open access journals. So these are the numbers of submissions to Biomed Central, PLOS, and Hindawi over the last 5 years. Our submissions have just hit 3,000 a month. The number that you see there is 26,000 in 2009. Our submissions have gone up 40% since this time last year, and we expect them to go up significantly after the release of the next impact factors in June, because what happens when impact factors are released is that submissions to our journals tend to triple. So we'll see another big increase. So our submissions are going up very, very fast. And so more and more authors are choosing to publish in open access journals. Why? Partially because they are getting very high rankings in the citation index. So Stephen mentioned the high impact factors of PLOS Biology and PLOS Medicine, both of them over 12. Our malaria journal is the second out of 15 in the tropical medicine group of journals in the JCR. Our BMC Bioinformatics is the third out of 29 in mathematical and computational biology. Genome biology has an impact factor of 6.15. We expect that to go up quite a lot. We have breast cancer research is the second highest ranking breast cancer specific journal. We expect these to continue to increase. And so the authors who are choosing to publish in these journals need supporting. The other reason that they're choosing to publish in these journals is visibility. These are three journals three papers that have been published in Biomed Central journals in the last 6 weeks. So the first one was published on the 6th of April, and by last week had 7,500 accesses already. So that's in less than 6 weeks. The second one was published on the 8th of April, had 5,200. The third one was published on the 5th of May, which was what? Less than 2 weeks ago. It's already had 3,600 accesses. So that's the sort of visibility that papers are getting, and authors are beginning to understand that they are getting that much more visibility. These are just hits to Biomed Central site. They also get a similar number of accesses in PubMed Central. So this is only half of what they get. Biomed Central website receives 32 million page views a month. And so, we have a lot of people coming past our site. Lots of open access funds. This has been discussed at great length, so I won't go on. And authors who can't pay, don't pay. Biomed Central provides an automatic waiver to authors based in 90 of the poorest countries, but individual waiver requests are also considered on a case-by-case basis. So a doctor in a practice in Texas who doesn't have any money can ask for a waiver and will get it if they're not funded. So this is for Biomed Central. There are about 12% of our papers are published with a waiver. 54% come from individual payments. That means a payment per paper rather than through some sort of institutional membership scheme. And just over 30% come from a membership scheme. And the membership types, the point of memberships are to reduce barriers for authors and to increase the visibility of open access journals. And there are various sorts. There are prepay memberships, which means that institution will pay funds into a deposit account, and then the charge is covered by funds from the account, and it's very simplified administration. There's a supporter membership where institutions pay a flat fee, and then there's a discounted article processing charge. And then PLOS also has an individual membership scheme for individual members. And finally, if you do have an institutional membership, it makes complying with OA deposits very, very easy, because many OA publishers can deposit automatically using SWORD protocol or other protocols as necessary into your repository. So the moment that one of your authors publishes in one of our journals, we deposit directly into your repository. I'm sorry the slide's gone black. It wasn't supposed to do that. It did something when I copied the thing. So what it means is that the paper is published by Biomed Central instantly, goes into an institutional repository as soon as one of your researchers publishes. So finally, I think my message here is that if the authors and the researchers are choosing to publish in an open access journal, the institutions who they reside in need to help support them to do that. More and more of them are doing that, and so I would suggest that your open access policies contemplate how you can support those authors, and that this is a virtuous circle, because in doing that we can also help facilitate compliance with your repository. I think that gold and green should work together. Thank you.